So now we come back to our lecture, and today the age which we are going to discuss is the age of Chaucer, and I gave you an overview of the age in our previous lecture. We discussed about it, the political things or the major traits of the age or the political things that were going on at that time, and the most important thing was the Hundred Years of War with France, and in this battle, Normans, Saxons, Danes, everyone was united in England, and a foundation of the nation was being laid by these people because they were fighting unitedly, shoulder to shoulder against the French. Yes, against the French, and they considered themselves people of England or as Englishmen. And then the after this 100 years of war, there were a few civil wars going on, or civil turmoils, rather, I would say. Civil turmoils were going on in England, and the major event in this connection is the Peasants' Rebellion, or the Rebellion of the Peasants, or Yat's Rebellion. And actually, it was a rebellion uh, which was initiated because the peasants or the people who belong to the countryside, the farmers, they believed that the 100 years of war was won largely by the yeomen, and the yeomen were the people of the countryside, and they thought that there is some sort of injustice going on against them, and that's why they rebelled, and they fought for their own rights, but it was crushed. And the person who uh, was connected with this, his name is Wack Taylor, W-A-T Wack, and Taylor, T-Y-L-E-R, and it is also known as Taylor's Rebellion. Then another important incident, or the civil war, it was a civil war between two major houses, and it was called the War of the Roses. And it was a series of wars which were going on between Lancaster and York. Lancaster and York, both of these, should I write it, or are you understanding? Maybe I should use the whiteboard. Just a minute. Okay. So it was that Taylor, the the person involved in Peasants Rebellion, and then we have fight between Lancaster and York. So York was a major city at that. The voice is breaking up, and okay, if anyone is facing voice problem, then he is requested to rejoin. Just stop your connection once, leave the room, and join it again. It will be restored, I hope. Okay. So actually, I have to stop the screen because there are a lot of things going on, as I told you earlier, and voice issue. But my internet connection is stable. Everyone else is hearing, and I don't know what is going on. हाँ जी, अब आवाज ठीक है? Okay. If there is a voice problem for a minute, just raise your hand instead of uh, writing and all that. Okay, so I was on War of Roses. The War of Roses was fought between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. These two were the major houses. The houses of Lancaster, people of the people of Lancaster were the ones who had the ruling. They were the ruling party. They were the ones who had the crown. And the York people, York was very influential city in the time in the Roman time, and also after that. And why it was famous because there were a lot of clergymen who were coming out of York. And interestingly, the peasants in the peasants' rebellion, there was a person who was involved. His name is John Ball, and John Ball is also known as John Bull in uh, York, and the uh, people very much celebrate all these events. And later on, we will have one more incident in the history of England, which is very much important and which is also which has its foundation and connections with York. So, in the Battle of Roses, uh, House of Lancaster and House of York they were involved, and why it is called Battle of Roses because every English family in the ancient times or traditionally they had their insignia or their symbol. The symbol of York was a white rose, and the symbol of Lancaster was a red rose. And both of these, when both of these roses fought, as they were called at that time, so it was called the Battle of Roses. And interestingly, today, I mean, in recent times, when I was at University of York, we had a competition. University of York has a tradition of a sports competition, and competition is known as the competition of roses, or the roses, simply the roses, or the roses sports event. So this is a tournament or a series of tournaments of different games between the University of Lancaster and University of York. So they have revived their, you can say their war, but in a softer form. So now they used to have games, and sometimes the Lancaster wins, and sometimes University of York wins, and sometimes the results are mixed up. So this is how they have revived their histories. They have made their history alive, but in a much more agreeable way. And this is how the nations do their things. And everyone knows that why it is named as roses, and this is very traditional. And then an important incident which happens in England is the Black Death, the plague, the epidemic of plague that wiped away half of the English population, and it was in the year 1340s. The Black Death is very important, and you will find some answers and questions about this. And during this era, the printing press, the first printing press, was brought to England by William Caxton, and I will come back to it again when I discuss it in detail. William Caxton. He was the person who brought the press in England, and it was 1476, and it is much later in history, but I have just mentioned it. And due to the arrival of printing press, a lot of people, uh, a lot of writers rather, they got published, and a lot of people started reading, and it was leading to Renaissance. And one more important historical point or political, as far as politics of the era are concerned, is the trade which began with different countries, and the English people followed the lead of Holland, because Holland was the first, were the people who were doing trade across the continent. And the rise of middle class is also very much important of that era. Okay. Now we come to the literary traits or the literary people that existed or that lived during that time. And the literary movement of the time reflects the very much stirring moments of history at that time. And these moments are these moments are recorded by Chaucer and by Wycliffe, by Langland, Lydgate, and after all these major writers, there comes Sir Thomas Malory and John Skelton. And also the drama, the foundations of drama are laid in this era. Uh, Maybe all of you know the mystery plays and the miracle plays. It was during this era that miracle plays and mystery plays were the foundation of all these drama was going on. Okay, the first writer I'm going to discuss is Geoffrey Chaucer. And why Chaucer? Because it is in the courses of all the universities, and also he is the first major English writer who wrote in English. It was, although it was in Old English, but he wrote with some element in it, with some element of poetry in it, and he was major writer because of his uh, influence, because he was influenced by the French models and the Italian models, and they and he also wrote the much celebrated work, which is the Canterbury Tales, and all of you know the Canterbury Tales. And in exam, you will have a few questions from Chaucer and from his works, and not a few questions. And when I say a few questions, it means they give about uh, 10% or 10 questions from this era, from the medieval age and from the age of Chaucer and from Renaissance. There are about 10 to 12 questions which repeatedly asked of you in the examination. So Geoffrey Chaucer, he was born in the year 1338, and his uh, origins were 1330. Sorry, uh, Chaucer, Chaucer 1338, and he lived for about 70 or 62 years or 63 years, and his life is full of uh, the element of that era. He was connected to court in the beginning. He was connected to court, and had a good life going on. He was married to the woman, the maid of the queen, which was a very much important position at that time. And he was also a member of Parliament of England, and he was knighted. He was also knighted, and he was knighted in the Shire of Kent, Knight of the Shire of Kent, Knight of the Shire of Kent. And I'm writing everything in the chat so that it is more okay than the whiteboard. So, and he was later on, his fortune was overturned, like it happened with many people in that era. And he was uh, actually, why all this happened? Because in the court, the influences of the Lord work very much. If a person is connected to a certain lord, and if that lord has a very important position with the queen or the king, then this person is going to enjoy his life. And later on, if the king changes, or if there is a change in the mood of the king, and the lord is no longer under the favor of the king, then this person also suffered. And the same thing happened to uh, Geoffrey Chaucer, and he was supported by Duke John of North, And when he was not in power, Chaucer was also left off from the court, and he started living in poverty. But it was very fruitful for his poetry because he wrote at that time, and his poetry can be divided into three major portions. The first portion is the French influence, the French influence. The second one is the Italian influence, and the third one is the English period, or you can say the English period, the French period, and the Italian period. And these three periods have different marked qualities and characteristics. And the first age, the French influence or the French period in which he wrote, this was the era in which he wrote largely translations of the French literature, or he got inspired of French literature, and he later on followed the French model to write three of his works. And the three works which he wrote during that era are, this is important, note this, the Romance of the Rose. This book, it is in fact a translation from French work, which is the Romance of the Rose. And Romance of the Rose is translated in, uh, sorry, in French, its name was Roman de la Rose, and when he translated it, he named it the Roman of the Rose. Roman was the old spelling of rose, romance. Actually, it is in modern English, it is romance, the Romance of the Rose, and it was a translation. And in this uh, poem, one can see there is not much innovation, but one can see the influence of French literature in Chaucer. And many of the writers, when they started writing, they started off with translations because they had no English model at that time. And when there is no English model, then you have to resort to the other, to the novel or the literary forms that were going on from other eras, from other areas. And like we see in Urdu literature, we follow the initial poets. They followed the Persian model and the Arabic model, and still now we follow the model of the Persians or the Arabs. Although we have developed it very much from their models, we have introduced a few literary forms which are from English literature, like free verse and like comedy, and there are a lot more things which were not in present in Persian literature and in Arab literature, but we imbibed these forms from the English literature after the colonial period before 1947. And the other work, the Chaucer's first original work, which was not a translation, was the the Book of the Duchess. The Book of the Duchess. This is not Duchess. This is Duchess, and it was written in the form of a. It was written on the death of Lady Blanche, and she was the Duchess of Lancaster, and she was the wife of the person who was the Lord of uh, Geoffrey Chaucer. The Lord was the John of Monk. She was the wife of John of Monk. And this was a poem written in a form where the narrator sees a dream, and then uh, it is modeled on the French literary style, and it is an elegy. Elegy is a poem which is written on the death of somebody. Okay, the another poem of this era is The House of Fame. The House of Fame, and this poem is in this poem you see the sorry, it was not the House of Fame, it was the Parliament of Fowls. The Parliament of Fowls. Parliament of Fowls. Sorry. The House of Fame was from the later period, and you just overlook it. I don't think I can delete it. Uh, no, I can delete it. So you can just overlook this one. The Parliament of Fowls was another work which was written in in this era, and this is basically a story in which the fowls or the birds they run a parliament, they develop like a government, and it was uh, just a poem, not satiring too much like his Canterbury Tales, but it was written in that manner. And second period of Chaucer is the Italian period, which is very important one. And I think I should take a break now, and it will be just 5 minutes break. And after that, you will join the same link, and I will send you a message in the group.
Okay, sir.
Allah.